Good afternoon and welcome to the October 5th Santa Barbara City Ordinance Committee meeting. Mr. Crescente, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Sneddon.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
And Chair Jordan.
And here. And I'll let you lead us through open public comment for items that are not on the agenda, please.
Thank you. Sorry about that. If you are here to speak on items that are not on the agenda, now is your time to do so. It doesn't look like we have any attendees in the meeting so far. So
we'll close open public comment then, and we'll move on to our item for consideration, and that is a discussion and possible recommendation to council on a senior mobile home park overlay ordinance. And Mr. Colon, I'll invite John if you're leading this. Oh, Ms. Ostringer, hi. Both of you, bonus. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. It's nice to see you. I will be taking you through the Senior Mobile Home Park Overlay Ordinance today. Next slide, Ms. Grisanti. So the purpose of this amendment is to add a senior mobile home park overlay in order to preserve a variety and balance of housing types within the city by assuring that our existing senior mobile home parks that are living in our mobile home park overlay zone that we currently have will remain exclusively available to seniors. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take you back through the history to talk to you about how we got here. In October of 2020, Council adopted Chapter 30.57 to create a mobile home park overlay zone. The purpose of the overlay zone was to protect the naturally affordable housing stock that is represented by mobile home parks by preventing their conversion to other types of development, either through AUD or any other multifamily housing. Shortly after that adoption in December of 2020, the Flamingo Mobile Home Park residents spoke at public comment during the council meeting to notify the council members of the park owner's intent to open the park up to all age groups and change it from its senior status to a family park. This greatly concerned the residents of the park who wish to protect their senior status. And it's important to note that this park, Flamingo Mobile Home Park, is unique because it is the only senior mobile home park in the city. Next slide. So I wanted to talk to you about what is a senior mobile home park or senior housing. And the definition is housing that's 80% of the spaces are occupied by at least one person who's 55 years of age or older, or in which 100% of the spaces are occupied or intended for occupancy by persons 62 years of age or older. And this is the definition that's provided under the Federal Fair Housing Amendment Act. Under that act, discrimination in housing is strictly prohibited. However, they have carved out this unique area for seniors where we can, I guess you would use the word, discriminate by age for housing. There has been some public comment questions that we received prior to Planning Commission questioning why our ordinance didn't have a requirement of 100% of the spaces be occupied by seniors. And the reason is we have to comply with the Federal Fair Housing Act, and this is how they define and regulate senior housing. So that's the reason for the way that our ordinance is drafted, is to match this language here. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to give a quick example of how these two types of senior parks interplay, whether it be the 55 years at 80% or 62 years or over with 100%. And I thought this example would be helpful. It's straight out of the Fair Housing Act. I didn't draft it myself. I took it from the code. So in this instance, John and Mary apply for housing at the Vista Heights apartment complex, which is an elderly housing complex operated for persons 62 years of age or older. John is 62 years of age, but Mary is only 59 years old. If Vista Heights wishes to retain its 62 or over exemption, it must refuse to rent to John and Mary because Mary is under 62. However, if Vista Heights does rent to John and Mary, it might qualify for the 55 or over. So I think this gives just a nice illustration of how in some cases the 55 and over parks have a little bit more flexibility in how they rent to families or couples or people choosing to live together. And I don't know whether Flamingo was the 100% at 62 or over or the 55 exemption. However, the way the ordinance is drafted, it would capture that park in any event. Next slide. So getting back to our history, after the public comment that was received on December 8th by the Flamingo Park residents, the next week on December 15th, Council adopted an interim urgency ordinance to prevent the conversion of senior mobile home parks to all-age parks. The interim urgency ordinance was extended by Council on January 26th in order to allow the City Attorney's Office to do some outreach and research and draft the ordinance that's before you today. The interim urgency ordinance will expire on December 14th, 2021, so we're moving this along quite quickly. The permanent ordinance before you will add a zoning overlay that's contained within the broader mobile home park overlay, and it will permanently restrict existing senior mobile home parks, namely the Flamingo Mobile Home Park, from being converted to an all-age park. And next slide, please. I modeled the ordinance before you after the senior mobile home park overlay that was adopted in Yucaipa. I specifically picked Yucaipa and closely mirrored our ordinance to theirs because their ordinance was challenged on constitutional grounds. And in 2012, the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals found that Yucaipa's ordinance was constitutional and found in favor of the city of Yucaipa. I did add a small change from what was in Yucaipa, and that is a reference to Title 24 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 100.307. And I know through public comment we got before the Planning Commission meeting, there was some question as to what this meant and why I included it. So it's really just the code section and mechanism that makes sure that the parks are complying with the Department of Housing and Urban Development's senior occupancy verification rules. I added it because in the Putnam case, the plaintiff challenged Yucaipa's ordinance and argued that it might not be valid because it didn't have a provision in it that required this compliance and documentation with HUD's occupancy verification rules. The Court of Appeal declined to actually rule on that argument because the plaintiff hadn't raised it at the lower court, but seeing that it had been an argument that was raised, I thought it would be wise to add this particular federal regulation to our ordinance just to ensure that if someone in the future were to raise that challenge again, the city would be covered. Next slide. The Planning Commission saw this ordinance on September 16th. They had only one small change to the ordinance that's before you, and they requested with regards to the age restriction for the 55 years and older that at least one person be the occupant of the coach. They wanted to add that that person also, that it's their principal place of residence. They felt that because the coach could be occupied also by someone that was younger than 55, that it might prevent people from taking advantage of it, where an older person might also be on the lease with a younger person, but not necessarily intending that to be their principal place of residence. The Planning Commission was very supportive of the ordinance amendment. They made a unanimous motion to recommend approval of the ordinance with that small change. Similarly, the public comment we received, both written and oral, was almost unanimously supportive of the project. We did receive a letter right before the Planning Commission hearing from Mr. Ballantyne, an attorney for the owners of Flamingo Mobile Home Park. And he also did speak at the Planning Commission in opposition and objection to the ordinance being applied to Flamingo Mobile Home Park. Next slide, please. Generally, Mr. Ballantyne's argument was that the Flamingo Mobile Home Park had been converted to an all-age park prior to the interim urgency ordinance being adopted by council on December 15th. Under the mobile home residency law, before a park owner can make certain changes in the regulations to the park, they need to meet and confer with the residents of the park. That did happen. On November 30th, 2020, the Flamingo Mobile Home Park owners met with a meet and confer with the tenants of the park to discuss the conversion of the park to a all-age park. The tenants objected to the conversion and expressed their concern. Under the mobile home residency law, if there's an objection to the proposed conversion or changes, then that change cannot occur for a minimum of 6 months. So in this case, our interim urgency ordinance was put in place prior to that change being effectuated 6 months later. So this permanent ordinance will just continue that status quo that our interim urgency ordinance had in place as of December 15th of 2020. Next slide, please. When we were drafting this ordinance amendment, we realized that the historical district overlay and the mobile home park overlay were inadvertently codified in the same chapter. So they both currently live in chapter 30.57. So part of the proposed amendments you'll note in the ordinance is that we are moving the mobile home park overlay over into a new chapter of 30.58. The historic district overlay zone will remain unchanged in chapter 30.57. Next slide. So with that, it's staff recommendation that the ordinance committee consider the proposed zoning ordinance amendment to amend Santa Barbara Municipal Code, chapter 30.57, and amend the zoning map to add a senior mobile home park overlay within the mobile home park overlay zone. Also, we'll be converting that over to chapter 30.58 and make a recommendation for approval to City Council. And that concludes my presentation, but I'm here for questions.
Thanks, Ms. Ostranger. So questions from the committee? All right, I'll throw you a couple, which I'm sure surprises you. So you led us through the part that that had the dual federal language on 55 plus or 60 plus, and we ended up with 55 plus, but only one person. And you gave that example. And so the 55 plus and one person and 80% under the law gets us to the most advantageous spot to accomplish our goal of protecting this housing stock. That's the way that works?
Right, so we have to use that definition. We have to have the either or. And okay. The reporting requirements for parks that are at least one person is 55% or older at 80%. Those reporting requirements are a lot stricter than what you'll see in the 62 and older.
But it also protects a 56-year-old with a 54-year-old spouse, and you know they don't just fall off the cliff because somebody's a year younger than the requirement, although the other parties clearly meets the requirement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it could be for people that wanted to live together or family where one person is 55
Right.
and another person, they have an adult child that needs assistance that wants to live with
Right.
them. There's all sorts of scenarios that could be.
Got it. Perfect. And then the reference to the meet and confer, and there was a objections raised. How do we know that, or do we know that for certain? Is that bulletproof in this process of steps that have to occur for us to get the 6 months?
The residents we've spoken with the residents and they've told us they've objected. They even had a informal transcript of the meeting that they provided to us. So that's how we know.
Okay, perfect. You froze up for a second. And then over the past 11 months, have we seen potential violations to our emergency ordinance?
Yes, we believe we have. And the park residents have sent us some information and I've referred that over to our code enforcement section.
Very good. Okay, those are all my questions. Great presentation. And Councilmember Snedden.
Thank you. I think your last question there just raised a question for me about what happens when there is a violation. What is the order of operations there?
Well, we'll investigate it, and we are currently investigating that. We typically ask for voluntary compliance first, and that's this would go. If we couldn't get voluntary compliance, then we'd have to take some other legal action either through an injunction but hopefully the park owners will be willing to work with us.
Thank you. That's my only question.
And if in case there was a clear violation, is there a way to get that back? I mean, if they clearly violated and did not put somebody in there that met our emergency ordinance, how do we carve that back? Or do we just not, and they have to do that in the future, and they kind of gained a unit or whatever outside of the ordinance?
I think we'd have to, would be a situational consideration as to if we see that it was a blatant violation and, the park is now at 50% occupancy, then we'd want to consider it. If it's, 1 or 2, the way the ordinance is drafted, as those people move out, a senior would be needed to be placed in there.
Okay, very good. So I don't see any other questions. So Ms. Crisante, why don't we open it up for public comment related to this item, please?
Thank you, Chair Jordan. If you would like to speak on this item, you can raise your hand within the app. And we can call on you. I don't believe we have anybody who would like to speak on this item, Chair Jordan.
Good enough. Ms. Snedden, if you would stay right there and lead us off for
I don't want to interrupt.
conversation and a motion, that'd be great.
Chair Jordan?
Yep.
Mr. Ballantyne did raise his hand.
Okay, we will back up to that then. Go ahead.
Mr. Ballantyne, you can unmute yourself and speak.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, Mr. Chair, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Thank you. I'll be very brief. I submitted a short letter. We submitted a lengthy letter to the Planning Commission, which I trust has been made available to you. We do oppose this. I'm just going to address a couple of things that came up in this hearing. First of all, it's still unclear from what's been said and anything as to what research the city has ever done to determine whether or not, first of all, Flamingo is a senior park, as it believes a senior park is or should be, and secondly, that it's the only senior park in the city. We've actually seen no data on any composition of any residents of any parks in the city. So we're a little at a loss as to how the city could possibly be proceeding on a fact-based initiative without any actual facts. Secondly, as to specifically my park, which does seem to be targeted and solely targeted by this, there was a comment about a meet and confer and an alleged transcript of a meet and confer. I'm not aware of what that would be, of what that is. That's never been provided to us. No one's ever asked us about what happened at the meet and confer. I would think since the city seems to be basing part of its going forward on what happened in the meet and confer, I'm a little bit surprised at the lack of dialogue and inquiry with the park. Secondly, I've said in my letter, and I'll say again, that although it's been characterized that the park somehow made a statement it's not going to comply with the law. That's not true. The park will comply with any law. The park believes it's in compliance with the law now. I'm surprised to hear that there's some thought or possibility that somehow the park's not in compliance with something. We'd certainly welcome a dialogue with the city to find out what exactly the city thinks we might not be in compliance with, so we can address that. Because although we don't necessarily agree with this process or what the city wants to do, we certainly intend to follow the law.
Thank you. Any further speakers, Ms. Crescente?
No further speakers, Chair Jordan.
All right, then it is to the committee for discussion and a motion. Ms. Snedden.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. I'm prepared to make the motion, but I think first this question of the meet and confer transcript, if we could just have that answered.
Thank you. Chair Jordan, Council Member Snedden. It was a document that the property owner or tenant, I should say, transcribed from, I guess it was a Zoom meeting that they had. It's not a formal transcript that we would ever put into a court of law, but it was a fairly decently well transcribed document. And with regards, just as I could point out, attached to the staff report is the letter and the proposed changes that the Flamingo Mobile Home Park owners sent to the residents, outlining how it was being changed from a senior mobile home park to an all-age park.
Thank you. That satisfies that question for me. And I believe this has been through a really thorough process. I think it's been a long time coming. I'm really appreciative of the catch on the historic resources and the overlays there. And this is, in my mind, just really ready to go and has been for some time. So I'd be happy to move the recommendation that we move this forward to council with the proposed changes on the recommendation slide. And that's it, the motion.
Mr. Gutierrez? Thanks. Any comments?
No, I'm looking forward to it, going to the rest of the council and hearing what my colleagues have to say.
Thanks. I'll just echo Councilmember Snedden. This is I guess a right hand, left hand. It's the other hand of the action we recently took to also offer protections for vacancy control. The two together serve as a backstop for very threatened low income and senior low income housing stock in the city. And I also enthusiastically will support this as I did that. Ms. Crescente, would you call a roll call for the motion, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Jordan. We will move the recommendations to full council. Was moved by Councilmember Snedden, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Snedden.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
And Chair Jordan.
Yes. So that passes unanimously. Thank you to staff for the great staff report and good overview of this. And we will see you at 2 o'clock for the regular council meeting, and we will be adjourned until then. Thanks.